Good morning. I'm on my level 112 Necromancer, David Z. And for this video, I'm going to talk about three things. I'm going to talk about GamParse. I'm going to talk about Heretics Twincast. And I'm going to talk about the wound line of spells. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is GamParse. GamParse is the program I use to parse my logs. If you're going to be serious about the kind of damage you put out, you're going to want GamParse. It's going to tell you how you're doing in comparison with other people. It's going to tell you what your most damaging abilities or spells are. And it's going to help shape what your spell line is, because you can look and get a sense of how long your average battle is, for instance. So you're going to need to get GamParse, and you're going to want the beta version. The reason you want the beta version is about a year or so ago, Daybreak changed the way it put out data in its logs, and that broke the non-beta version of GamParse. GamParse 2.0.0. I think it's 18 now, but whatever it is, the beta, this is what you need, because it's the one that's working the best right now. So you're going to go to the Everquest forums or the Daybreak Games forums, go to the Veterans Lounge, and search the word GamParse, and it's going to come up with a number of discussion threads. You take the top one, you go to the very first page, and it's going to have a download here link in the very first post. Download GamParse and install the program. I don't think there's much installing. You just click on it. Once you've installed it, you can open your character's log file. You can load a week, 2 days, whatever you want to load. I think this is the last 24 hours or something. So here's the first fight. It's in Kale Draco against a character named Sergeant Leal, a mob. And if you go to the overview, it's going to say the group did total damage of 1,100,000. This was obviously a burn, because we've got the Shadow Knight doing a ridiculous 486,000, and if you add in his pet, there's another 13, so almost 500,000 DPS from the Shadow Knight. Next we have the Ranger doing 334,000, the Rogue doing 352,000, and the Necromancer doing 171,000 plus 24,000, so about 195,000 or so from the Necromancer. So I'm far down the list. But in mitigation, you notice I was only on here for 22 seconds. So I had pulled the mob in. I think I may have had to feign, because I probably had multiple mobs coming in. I'd snared one, and I wanted to get rid of his aggro. And also, this is a very short fight, and on these short fights, Necros are not going to shine. It's a short fight against probably one mob. But so if we look on this particular, for the entire Kale Draco run, we go down to here. I select all of these fights, and then I use the control button and I deselect the ones where I had 0 or very low damage, because I was probably feigned, or in the case of Dire Fang, it was probably a wipe. And you can combine those fights, and you see I do much better. Now I'm doing 115,000 plus my pet 25,000, so about 140,000 DPS, compared to a Rogue doing 166,000. And the Bard is only doing 34,000, so the Bard was probably just not doing a hell of a lot. Plain spells, plain songs. And then here's a Berserker who came in briefly. And Berserkers should do a lot more damage than that. But anyways, what you can do is you get the total 2906, and then you can figure out exactly how many fights this is. So I deselected 3, so 47 minus 3 is 44. And you would divide 44 into 2906, and it will tell you exactly how long your average fights are. Now, then you go to player DPS, and you select David Z, and it's going to break down this first damage breakdown. I don't find particularly helpful for non-melee classes. Then they have this new breakdown. It gives you direct damage versus dot damage versus environmental. I don't know what that is offhand. Maybe a damage shield. And again, not super helpful because as a Necromancer, obviously it's all dots. DD breakdown can give you some Burning Venom, Bestowed Relive Strike, and Refute for Blood. You know, that's the damage those do. Call Skeleton Army. And then we have the dot breakdown. And you can see how your dots are doing in terms of what's your top dot, what's your next dot. And that's going to help you figure out what you want to do for your lineup. Because you want to do your highest damage, highest DPS dots first generally. So this is GamParse. You need it. It's very helpful. Now we're going to go back to the arena. So we're back in the arena. I told you about GamParse. That lets me figure out my data. The next thing I was going to tell you about is Heretics Twincast, which is currently down for another 4.5 minutes, but I bet I can talk that long. Heretics Twincast is kind of a special AA, and it's a very important AA for when you want to burn and you want to maximize your damage. When you activate it, it's going to give you this buff up here, and it's going to have, currently for me, 18 counters. When you've maxed it, it'll be 20 counters, and it procs off any direct damage spell, any damage over time spell, and off of damage over time spells that you don't cast but proc as a result of, for instance, this is Bestow Relife. Bestow Relife has 7 counters, and it will proc a life tap. That will use a counter. You've got Mortifieder's Unity, which gives you Flesh to Venom. That will use counters. When that procs, counters. And then you've got Flesh to Poison. That uses counters. Normally, what you want to do is you want to have these spells, you'll have to refresh these every 10 or 15 minutes as it uses up its counters. You'll refresh Bestow Relife in between each battle, and that's going to help up your DPS. But when you're running Heretics Twincast, I do not recommend that you have Flesh to Venom, Flesh to Poison, or Bestow Relife up. That will burn through these counters very quickly. And you'll be burning these counters on what are relatively low damage dots. You're not maximizing your damage. So this Twincast, you want to use it. And I don't tend to use, let's go direct damage, fire, no. Refute for Blood. I don't use Refute for Blood or other nukes when I'm running Heretics Twincast, because while they'll do say 16,000 damage, whatever, it's good. It's good. But when you do this Twincast effect, it twincasts for every one of, for the totality of the damage. And so, for instance, here's a Swift that's doing, 9,300 every 6 seconds. You've got Swifts that are doing over 11,000. That will twincast the entire run of that damage over time. So I prefer to save my Heretics twincast counters for my big DPS dots. Then one of the things sometimes I've run into, Heretics Twincast comes from Gift of Deathly Resolve, which was the earlier version of this AA. This is probably an amalgamation of multiple AAs. With the Gift of Deathly Resolve, you had to cast, you would cast Gift of Deathly Resolve, that would put a buff up here. Then you would cast a nuke, and it would proc a Twincast effect. Then you would cast a dot. So you would do nuke, dot, nuke, dot, nuke, dot. You no longer need to do that. That's not necessary. This will proc directly off of your dots. Okay. So I've given you some of the peculiarities of Twincast, Heretics Twincast. Call of Skeleton Army will not proc one of these. See, it's still 13. It used to use up a counter, but they fixed that. It's blocked, and so it will not use a counter now. On the other hand, if I do Refute for Blood, we've now got 12 counters left. That uses a counter. Here's another peculiar. This is a combination dot. It casts 2 dots, so it's going to use, I want to say 2 counters. But it actually uses 5 counters. I don't know why. I think it casts so many things. So 5 counters. I prefer not to use combination dots when I'm using Heretics. Why? Because the combination is a combination of a high DPS dot and a low DPS dot. Normally, that's a good thing. You've got 2 dots running for 1 cast, and that's going to up your DPS because we've got all the mana in the world. But when you're doing Twincast, you might just want to use that 1 high DPS dot. Another one, let's see. So this is Pyre of the Shade Warden. It's a very high DPS dot, and it only uses 1 counter. Now let's talk about the wound line in connection with Heretics Twincast. Wound spells are a very special kind of spell. You would only use, they're only really useful on long fights. Fights that are over 2 minutes. The reason is a wound line of spell procs a long dot. In this case, base is 1 minute and 36 seconds, and with my focus earring, it goes up to 142 to 206. I'm not sure whatever it is, but it's long. And this is a low-level dot. When this low-level dot concludes, it procs another dot called proliferation, a proliferation of these dots. And this proliferation does tremendous damage. That's why you cast the wound. You want that proliferation. You want all 3 of these dots up, and they will all 3 proliferate. When you first cast this spell, if you have Heretics Twincast up, it will use a dot. Then when it proliferates, it'll use a counter. And then when it proliferates, it'll use another counter. And you want that counter to go off for that second one because it is a lot of damage. But you also want, okay, with the wound line, I was talking about the wound lines. I mentioned how long it lasts. You want this to run as quickly as possible because you want the second set. You want the second dot to come up as quickly as possible. So one of the tricks that necromancers use is they remove their focus earring. Now there is no extension. It's going to proliferate now in 1 minute and 36 seconds. So that's why I say these fights need to be at least 2 minutes, because you need it to proliferate. And you would cast Heretics Twincast. But okay, I'm not going to cast that yet. You wouldn't cast that yet. Okay, so let's say we have not cast Twincast, and we're about to start our fight. This is a long fight. We're in for the long haul. This isn't one of those short minute fights. This is going to be maybe a 3-5 minute fight. It's a raid, perhaps. This is not my raid lineup. That's for another day. It's a mix of my group and my wounds, but this is just for demonstration. So I would cast my 3 wound spells, and they start ticking down. So I've got them up, and they're saying there's 1 minute and 25 seconds left, and it also procced off one of Cascade of Decay. Then once I've done that spells, I put back my earring, because while I want this to proc as quickly as possible, I want these to go on as long. So I now begin to lay down whatever normal dots I've chosen for this encounter. And on raids, it's used to be about 3 pages of dots, 3 spell lines of dots that you would mem and load and cast. Now it's down to about 2 pages. So you're casting all of these while you wait for your wounds to tick down. Right now there is 40 seconds left. And then as these begin to fade, you recast them. You're keeping them up. Okay, now we're at 21 seconds left. Let's go ahead and cast Heretics Twincast, because now they're up, and now I start using my counter. 17, 16, and watch when that procs, it'll use. I'll stop for a second because I want to show you. So the wound's got second. Boom, proliferation, it uses a counter. Proliferation, it uses a counter. Proliferation, it uses a counter. So you want to use those counters, because that's going to up your spell. And then you begin to cast these others using up your counters. Normally you might not want to use this combination dot. I haven't moved one out. And all of these are getting the Twincast effect, and so the entire length of the dot is going to have, well, actually I shouldn't do that. That's not what I wanted. So yeah, you're laying down your dots, you're using up your counters. As I said, you can see that Refute for Blood, uses a counter, and if I do this, it used the rest of my counters. So there we go, those are my counters. And that's how you use Heretics Twincast, and these wound lines will do great damage, just tremendous damage on these long fights. So we'll let this run out. I should mention that because Call Skeleton Army, your swarm pet spell, doesn't use counters, you will be casting that. It used to use counters, but they've changed that so that it's blocked from using up these counters. So you can use Call Skeleton Army as you would normally. So that's going to be DPS, just throwing out there. I honestly don't know if Remote Sphere of Blight uses counters. because it's kind of different. I need to test that. If it uses counters, it's still pretty damn good. So I would go ahead and use it. But you would want remote sphere of blight is about 37,000 DPS. If there's multiple mobs, then really quickly, say there's 5 mobs, you're doing 185,000 DPS just with this. So it's a great spell. You want to use this. It's often going to be cast first unless you're working with enchanters or bards who are mezzing mobs. I usually do call skeleton army 4 dots, call skeleton army 4 dots, and I also drop remote sphere first thing. This puts up a, so you drop this, and it puts up an aura, and that aura will be up there about 30 seconds, and it's doing 37,000 DPS every 6 seconds, which makes it one of your top dots, if not top dot. A lot of Necros don't use that, or at least that's been my experience. It's well worth using. So now we go back to GamParse, just to show you. Hasn't come up yet. This is actually earlier. So let's do this. Okay, this is an example of what I just cast without Heretics Twincast. And so you see here that cytoxic proliferation is doing, depending on, this is 65,000 DPS, but this would be 11,400 DPS over time. But then let's go down to Heretics Twincast, and the DPS goes up to 170,000 or 19,000. So you can see how that Twincast effect helped that proliferation. Violent proliferation here. This is without Twincast, 60,000. With Heretics Twincast, 112,000. But let's look really, for these long fights, the important thing is total damage. And here we're looking at 33,500,000 DPS, or total damage, versus 14,500,000. So that's Heretics Twincast, very important tool for burning. That's also explains a little bit about the wounds lines, explains about GamParse. I'll end that video now. And keep in mind, when I say don't use flesh to venom, flesh to poison, bestow relife, that is only in the context of using Heretics Twincast, because you're saving your counters. I'll do other videos and we'll discuss different aspects of playing a Necromancer, but this is hopefully helpful.